So hello everybody, it's yet another Thursday and it's yet again Astrid with Spiritual Alchemy Show, and this time yet again I'm happy enough to have a guest, which everybody I'm sure is happy about, so they didn't have to listen to my rant for an hour. And this time I have amazing Jason Augustus Newcomb. In case you haven't seen it on Facebook, and you've been too busy with tweeting about Kaufafet today, Jason is a natural gifted master of the mind. He's doing all sorts of things. So he's making audio recordings, he's making books and visual works, and he got published at Weiser Books, and literally like all sorts of things about occult, Hermetism. Like he's extremely flexible and extremely professional. And also if you Google his name, or if you look for him on YouTube, he has loads of videos that are about divination, but also explains all sorts of interesting things. And listening to Jason is actually really joy, because he tends to explain even very complex hermetics or complex issue in easy and I would say very approachable language. So when Jason came to me and I asked him about the topic of the show, he said, how about innovators versus traditionalists? And I was like, God damn it. Now I'm starting to fixing my karma, and actually somebody's starting to like my show after free. So doing it, we have this topic that everybody's arguing about, and everybody will hate us. So I'm thinking, okay, so this is such a great topic. We have to do it. There's no way how we can go around it, and it makes so many people angry. We just have to do this topic. So I decided to, yeah, sure, this is absolutely amazing topic. I personally feel about it that this is such an old battle, like old versus new. Even people like Paracelsus was like, he was the traditional rebel kid, and now we have people like, no, we have to do things like Paracelsus, and it seems to me like this cycle of good and old and new, and so it seems to me like this eternal battle. So we are going to talk about this eternal battle with Jason today, who is here with me, and I'm going to be hello. So we are going to actually start this eternal battle to actually talk about, Jason, how you started with the occult. Like, what was, like, for many people they have a different, I would say, I'm calling it magnets. So what was your magnet that drove you into the mystical arts?
There were really two things. The first thing was the tarot. I was introduced to it at a very young age, and I'm not going to go into the whole long story of how it came about, but I became sort of obsessed with it, and I started going to a New Age store, and I eventually purchased a set of tarot cards when I could scramble it together. I was like 10 or 11 when I got interested in it, and about a year after that, someone mentioned to me that there were real witches in the world, and that they really did real magical spells, and that you could learn to do those kinds of magical spells. And I was like, well, I wonder if I could find out more about that at that New Age store that I went to and got my tarot cards from. And sure enough, they had a whole section. I bought a few things on witchcraft, but I really found myself drawn more towards the more ceremonial magic stuff. So I got A.E. Waite's, Book of Black Magic and Pacts, and I got Aleister Crowley's Magic in Theory and Practice, and I got Ray Buckland's big blue book of witchcraft as well, and a couple of other witchcraft books, the Witch's Bible. So I mean, I started amassing a collection of books probably before I was 15, and that just sort of started doing stuff. I did a love spell for a friend of mine, and he got a girlfriend pretty quickly thereafter. So I felt like, woo, this worked really well. It wasn't a love spell on a specific person. It was one of those sort of New Agey, Llewellyn love spells, just to sort of bring love into his life, and that happened. So I can't remember I tried to do a love spell for myself, and that didn't work. So that sort of was disappointing. But I think that I didn't. I don't know that I asked any girls out after that. I think that's one of those missing components. You kind of got to take that action in order to
Yeah.
So and I started doing sort of scrying work and stuff that trying to see spirits and travel into other dimensions and so forth, and having those sorts of path-working kind of experiments, and just really did that for a few years, and then kind of got caught up in drugs and actually meeting girls and music and theater and stuff, and I kind of got away from it. And then in my early 20s, I kind of got back into it, and that's the really potted version of that.
So it seems like what the spell started, the drugs finished.
Right.
It's like it's like, oh.
There's nothing that will bring a teenage girl to you like a case of wine coolers and some marijuana.
See, at the beginning, guys, I was telling you, if you are too traditional, you're not going to have a good time tonight.
But I mean, you asked me off air, if I considered myself a traditionalist or an innovator.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, I don't know that I would have even had a way of expressing that when I was younger, but I think that if someone had asked me that question, I would probably have said that I was a traditionalist, because in as far as my understanding of what magic was, that I was doing it pretty much the way that it had always been done. But I mean, nowadays we have much more access to literature. I mean, there was no internet then. Or it was just message boards through modems and stuff. So I'm sure there were people talking about the occult, but I wasn't doing it. And so it was a much more mysterious thing than it is now. People have so much information at this point. You can really look up almost anything about any topic related to the occult or any other subject and find so much information and misinformation about it in moments. That just wasn't the case. So, I mean, I definitely would have seen myself as being fairly traditional. I was trying to do things the right way as well as I could. It really wasn't until I started hanging around in occult groups that I really started becoming an innovator. And that innovation was largely just because I noticed that most of the people around me weren't really doing very much magic. And I'm not gonna cast aspersions upon anyone, but most people who were involved in the magical groups that I was in were really confining themselves to doing something like some sort of frame ritual, either a monthly moon ritual or a daily lesser vanishing ritual of the pentagram, and just sort of doing that for months and years and doing nothing else. Never experimenting any further into things. And so I started thinking, what is it that really moves people to doing more? Why am I more interested in actually, casting spells and making changes in the world? Why is that happening with me? And you asked also about black magic, and I think, to a certain extent, I guess I kind of was more of a black magician in a positive sense, and that I kind of wanted to see how you could push on the world with your rituals, how you could change things. And to an extent, that does draw you towards black magic, So, you know what I mean?
That's something I actually wanted to ask you. It was like, I actually realized, and I've seen many magicians who later on in life do become, I would say, traditional ceremonial magicians, or even pursue more light and more hermetic and more pure paths. It's loads of them actually, what I've seen actually are doing the best or become one of the key figures, seems to go through a stage of a black magic in their youth. It seems like somehow this youth Mars energy, drug, sex, rock and roll, demons, and then just like it's like. So, how do you think about it? Do you think like people who, let's say, who went through periods of black magic before they go on more traditional paths have an advantage, or is it disadvantage? Is something that you have to kind of cleanse yourself of, or do you think it can be beneficial?
I think that it's a very complicated question. First of all, I want to pull apart the two pieces of it. The traditional magician versus magician who is on a path of ascension with their magic, I don't think those are necessarily related at all to one another. And in fact, I would say that the ascension magician tends to be more in the new agey or innovative kind of crowd than the traditional magician, because if you look at the tradition of magic, it's really largely black magic. Even if you're saying a lot of prayers to Yahweh, you're still in the end, trying to create talismans that are going to do something in the world, and many of those things are not really necessarily of benefit to everybody involved. You know, I mean, if you think about it, if you could do a spell to get a job and you get a job, that means that the other 100 people that apply for that job didn't get a job. So your magic is causing harm to other people. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, or that really is truly black magic. But anytime that you're pushing on the universe in any way, you're kind of messing with the laws of things to an extent. Whereas doing meditation or doing sort of ascension-oriented magic, where you're really doing something that's more of a theurgic, or an attempt to create a connection with the divine rather than causing an effect in the world, is not really that well represented in grimoire magic. So those people who call themselves traditional Solomonic magicians, they're they're either doing black magic or they're doing something that's really not as traditional as they they're claiming it is. I mean, without casting aspersions, I have lots of friends who are that's their thing, and I don't want to tell them that they're doing something wrong, but because ultimately I think that the biggest problem in the debate between innovators and traditionalists is largely just that there's a debate at all. There doesn't really, it's I see it constantly. I see people saying, you can't do this if you do this, or you're not, why? Who are you to make that rule? What are you even talking about? Where is that written in Holy Writ that you can't, do a Golden Dawn ritual and also, do a ritual from the 6th and 7th books of Moses and combine those together? Who says that's not allowed? What are you talking about? Where's that from?
It also seems funny that I know you're quite in Crowley, so it seems like what was innovator at the time, because you can't really think about something that would be more, I would say, controversial or innovative than Crowley was at his time. And now we got into the point when Crowley is kind of the traditional way of things. So it seems like where you can stand in a time and space is actually what is considered traditional. Or
absolutely. And in fact, two huge innovators that are rarely talked about in this regard, and not necessarily considered magicians all the time either, but would be Jesus Christ and the Buddha. Both of them completely flew in the face of the tradition that they were involved in and created something totally new. And in fact, both of them, less so Buddha, but the Jesus certainly went around healing people and taught his buddies how to do it. So they were doing magic in one way or another. But Crowley as traditional, I think, is something that would be a great mistake for people to really get too embedded with, because he certainly was an innovator in his time, and it wasn't even all that long ago. And in fact, there are still a lot of people who consider him to be non-traditional and, innovative in a negative sense, in that he, switched some things around in the Golden Dawn system, and even the Golden Dawn system is really an innovative system. It's a system that took a bunch of the sort of traditional lore and put it together into something that's very sort of cohesive and doesn't necessarily represent all of the previous information. There's definitely things that are considered to be the Golden Dawn truth that aren't necessarily considered to be the truth in, say, Paracelsus or certain grimoires. They use different words for different things and different colors for different things and different a different general feeling of how the thing should play out. So every generation kind of innovates in one way or another. And so what you're saying, that the traditions of yesterday, or the traditions of today, were the innovations of yesterday, is absolutely true. And I've been involved in the occult scene for really officially at least 30 years, but sort of intimately 20. And things have really shifted over that time period. How long have you been involved in occultism?
Me, publicly, when I went into public, I would say 4 years. as a solitary practitioner privately. Oh my God, I started with tarot when I was 6 years old. And I started with like a psychic predictions about the same time. I was at the same age. So, but publicly that means equals Facebook past like 3-4 years.
So I mean, Facebook as an occult playground is pretty weird in comparison with actually interacting with people. And I for the past really 6 or 7 years have had that. But previous to that, I was more involved in groups and with people and so forth, and it's very different because people on Facebook are it's much easier to just sort of go, yeah, I do a lot of occult work, whether you are sitting watching TV all day and doing nothing or not. There's really no way of proving otherwise. Even if you sort of set up an altar or something like that, doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing anything interesting with the altar. It just means you've piled a bunch of stuff on the table and took a picture of it. So it's very easy to sort of misrepresent yourself or to be misrepresented by others in those sorts of environments, so I think a lot of the challenges that come up really are intellectual ones that really have to do more with the social dynamic of communicating over computers rather than actually sitting in rooms with each other. Because I remember having conversations with guys back in the 1990s who were doing Enochian work in a way that they were trying to be more traditional with it. But there was no sense of sort of like, you're doing it wrong because you're using more of the Golden Dawn system. It was just, this is an interesting thing that we're doing. Well, how are you doing it? It was much less combative, whereas today when you see that sort of conversation happening over Facebook, it seems like it's more like, you're doing it wrong. We've got the right way. And I think that comes from not having that sort of rapport built up with each other.
So do you think the Facebook is forming how magic will be, let's say, understood in the future? Do you think that it will? Do you think it's going to expand? I would say from just the Facebook to, let's say, even like interhuman communication.
I'm not sure if I quite understand the question, but
let's say like because it seems like I was noticing it too, because when I was having like a communication with magicians and even shamans in a circle, it seems everybody is like nice, and the circles are really present, and like people bring food and they ask you how are you, and they look compassionate and nice. And then you go to internet and everybody's like, you're wrong, blah blah blah. And I'm like, where are those people that are nice, and where are the trolls in real life? Is that like two separate realities? And I was thinking that, okay, so maybe hopefully in the future, isn't that, I hope like it's not going to spread, like the trolls from the internet, are they going to spread to those real life shamanic circles? So you will come to shamanic circle and they, instead of giving you cake, they will like hit you with a cake in the face and tell you're doing it wrong, and then you go, it's like, is it going to like spread? Can it spread?
I think it's highly unlikely, because I think that there's two reasons for it from what I can see and what I can feel from the communication. One is, I think sometimes a communication that's not intended to be as antagonistic as it seems comes off that way on social media, because you can't, the nuances of tone and the smile that comes across a person's face when they say something, or just the inquisitive look in their eyes, is not present when someone's just writing something. And so often something that's just a question or a statement of what they're feeling comes off as an antagonistic attack on somebody else, and it's not even necessarily meant to be that way. And then there are, I think, a group of people out there who just enjoy watching negativity happen, and those people aren't the people who show up at an event and actually interact with others, because that energy is not going to be welcomed at all. If you show up at the spiritual potluck and you're talking shit to everybody, so I hope you don't mind using then they're just going to ask you to go. No one's going to put up with that. So I don't think that it would be possible for that to get to the real world. Mm-hmm. What worries me is that a lot of real world situations are dwindling. A lot of The shops where people can connect with each other are closing. A lot of groups that have events are seeing fewer and fewer people coming out to events because so many people are just getting their fix of communication over the internet. I mean, literally, you could not have a communication about the occult without finding a group of somewhat like-minded people to sit down with, 15 years ago. It just wasn't possible.
So do you think, Adam, what would be your wild guess how the future of the occult? Let's give a wild guess.
My wild guess about where the future of occultism is going? Okay, so, I mean, this brings up a complicated issue. I think one of the things that I've observed is that there comes a point in every occultist's life where they realize that in actuality, and it comes from either studying something historical or just looking at the world around them or just sort of coming to it as a realization, and that is that occultism is and always has been a business. It's a profession. It's something that people do as a part of a community, sometimes in a positive sense and sometimes in a negative sense. It's something that people are hired to do. You are the occultist of your community, the witch doctor, the shaman, the white witch or the black witch. You know, you're a person that someone knows has something that they can give, or even the reader, the psychic, all those things. That's a profession. It might not be a vocation. It may just be an avocation, meaning it's not necessarily something that you make money from, but it's something that's a role. It's a position that you have. And most of the time, it's something that you do make money from. And I think a lot of people early on in their magical career take an ultra opposite view of that. And I think it's partly because of our literary heritage. There are certain things which suggest that, doing magic for money is forbidden and you'll be punished by Zeus or Odin if you do so. Or it will come back upon you 3 times. For every penny that you earn, you'll lose 3. Or, there's all this kind of silly stuff out there. And that comes from like Christian guilt and stuff. If you look back 100 years ago, there's nothing like that in any kind of literature. That's completely modern stuff. It's recovering Christians feeling guilty about something or other. But so what I've observed happening is a lot of guys who used to be fairly critical about people making money off of anything to do with the occult are now offering things on the internet and selling them. They're now selling magical services. They're now selling magical objects. They're now doing essentially what I've been doing for 20 years. They're doing, and they used to be somewhat critical of me to my face and somewhat critical of me behind my back for doing so. But I think that, in fact, someone who you mentioned earlier, Jason Miller, kind of opened a lot of people's eyes to the fact that, you doing your occultism as your career, there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, it's a role that has largely been put into the shadow in our culture. The scientist, the doctor, the salesman, those are the people who are the magicians in our culture, and the people who do magic are like, that's some sort of weird stuff that we got to stay away from. So, and that, not to say that it wasn't sort of that way even back into the past, but it was a more accepted role, even if people were afraid. And you should be afraid. If you're going to go to see a magician who's going to cast a spell that could change your life, you should be a little frightened of that. That's a frightening thing to think about engaging in, right? But so
absolutely.
But the hobby magician, the hobby witch, the hobby hermeticist is a phenomenon largely of the 20th century. And with the hobby hermeticists going back a bit further than that, because there were certain people who just sort of looked upon it as an intellectual pursuit, like Sir Isaac Newton was a hobby alchemist. That was something that he did to enrich his spirit, but he wasn't necessarily trying to make gold in order to become rich or offering it to other people. John Dee and Edward Kelly are a little bit more ambiguous, particularly Kelly. It seemed like he was kind of working the alchemy thing as a way of getting royals and aristocrats to give him money. So.
You know what? I still don't know about Kelly because I'm doing the Prague Alchemy tour, and obviously I was going and doing some research on Kelly, and I actually did find contradictory information. On the one hand, they've been saying that he was lying, and obviously we wanted to escape, and he was imprisoned in the Czech Republic, but he didn't give the prisoner enough money, and they thought he should give us more if he can apparently make it out of the Philosopher's Stone. So they give him like an old rope, so he then broke his leg. But on the same hand, I actually have seen in actual letters that they are saying that he was just doing some stuff. Rudolf II was watching, and he actually did made the gold, and like everybody confirmed that it was actually real gold that he made. So I'm like, what the hell? So was he fraud or wasn't he fraud? Completely contradictory information, and still completely confused about Kelly. So if any of the listeners knows for sure, was Kelly the fraud or was he the real thing? Please let us know.
I'm sure plenty of your listeners have an opinion when we're the actual facts of the situation. Certainly, it seems clear from certain things that happened in the journals between John Dee and Edward Kelly that he was working things in a way to his advantage. Whether that was not, he was basically he was very interested in alchemy as a genuine subject, probably because he wanted to make gold and become rich. Apparently, they found some projection powder, both white and red, and utilized a bit of it. And then in fact that story that you're relating may in fact be some of the work that they did with the stuff that they found. And supposedly John Dee knew how to make more of it, and Kelly was constantly trying to get either him or the angels they were communicating with to give more information on that subject to him so that he could work on it himself. But Kelly's also written a couple of alchemical tracts that are interesting. So it's hard to say exactly what is story and what is fact in that situation. And I don't think there's too little real historical record other than a few letters here and there and some diary entries. And I don't think that can actually be resolved unless somebody can repeat the experiment and make gold in exactly the way that Kelly did in that scenario. Then we can answer that question. Right? But from what I understand, what he actually did was he didn't actually increase the amount of gold. He just sort of transformed something that had not been gold into gold, but it didn't actually make more gold than was present in the whole experiment beforehand. So it's hard to exactly say. But
that sounds pretty much like from what I was reading about him.
Yeah.
But
anyway, go ahead.
It kind of brings me to another question, and that is, we've been talking about the tradition that's on the one hand trying to preserve, I guess, the traditions or values, and on the hand the natural innovation that's happening. And that is, I would say, there is the most popular argument of the traditionalists, and it's, if it's not broken, why would you fix it? So how you see this idea that if it's not broken, why would you fix it?
Well, there's, first of all, there is a technology and our ideas about how the universe works change over time. And if we are part of that change in our own psychology, we cannot work things exactly the way that they used to be because we know things to be different. For instance, I just was studying Agrippa's first book of occult philosophy, and that thing is just filled with things that are factually untrue. The example that jumps to my mind immediately is that he mentions quartz as being related to water because of course quartz is petrified water. Not factually true. So so as our understanding grows, we have to look at things in slightly different ways. That doesn't mean that quartz doesn't have some qualities that I still would associate with water. It's clear, and it has that sort of vibration of cleansing and so forth that water also has. So I can see the association. But to then factually say that quartz is water tells me that you're not understanding how the world works in a sophisticated way. that comes from not knowing things rather than knowing things. So as we're going forward, if we're going to be rational and reasonable in the way that we approach occultism, we have to accept that certain things that our ancient brethren believe to be true simply aren't true, and move forward accordingly. So it is broken. There are things that are broken within ancient magic because they did not know how the world works in an accurate way. And that doesn't mean that we can't utilize many of the same ideas. We simply just need to adapt them to our times in the way that we perceive the world as functioning today. And if you want to say that the way that the ancients perceived the world was correct and the way that we perceive it today is incorrect, that's fine. But when you're watching television or driving your car, you're utilizing technology that is based upon not feeling that way. So.
Yeah, so nice and so sophisticated. I should be like a neutral journalist, but I'm not. So this is my show, so I can be one-sided as I want to. And if somebody's asking me about this, I'm always like, if you like those ideas of 14th, 15th century, I will give you a 14th century toilet and 14th century medical help. And see how you like the traditionalism now. So you're so nice and sophisticated. I'm always terrible.
It's not necessary to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like it really isn't. But if you look at it, and say, oh no, there's no reason to not just do it exactly the way that it's written. Well, there's lots of reasons, because you don't believe most of this. The person who wrote that book believed a bunch of stuff that you don't believe. So it's absurd for you to think that you can't. Now, Joseph Liszewski created an interesting sort of workaround from that. Are you familiar with his book, Ceremonial Magic?
I've read part of it, but I didn't finish it, I must admit.
He's very cantankerous and very strongly believes his point. And I think actually he's sort of the father of this movement of traditionalism and that attitude, which in many ways, I don't want to get into too much trouble here, but this traditionalism, it reminds me of fundamentalism, and it frankly reminds me of the attitude of Donald Trump. Just like you don't have to pay attention to the way the world works, you have to pay attention to the way that I say it works. That sort of silly attitude that doesn't really look at the world in an accurate way at all, and just denies things that are true and says they just simply aren't because I say they're not. That's the kind of thinking there. But he has an interesting workaround for which actually shows that he's not as traditional as he purports to be or other people hold him up to be, which is that in order to get into the magical frame of mind of working with the grimoires exactly as they are, you basically have to create a space in your mind in which you create a subconscious synthesis of that worldview and enter into it and start living in that way of looking at things, and that begins to make the magic operate. But I feel like that's one of those things that's like, well, why do you have to create that rather than just looking at the world as it is and working with magic that will work in either context? So, I don't know. I mean, it's different ways of approaching things.
That actually reminds me of something that one of the magical people I was talking to recently. And this person told me that at some point the teachers have to step aside. And he has to step aside and let the Mars energy of the young student to go forward. And if the teacher is not going to step aside, the student is always going to be impossible for him to actually move forward and reach where he needs to reach. And that made me think, and I was, if actually this idea of the teacher has to step aside, if it does, isn't that I would say the last stage of the personal development or the magical development of the teacher, when after all of those teachings, he has to truly say, okay, it's not about my ego, it's not about my self-importance, and obviously it's not about the highest vice, which is a pride, and I can step aside and let the student go forward. So how do you feel about it? Do you think the teacher really has to at some point in his or her life just to step back or step aside and let the energy go through?
Yes, and I think one of the most important things that a teacher can do in that process is to reveal their own limitations in humanity, so that the person can realize that there isn't this separation between the two of them. It's not necessarily the right thing to do at the beginning of a relationship. At a certain point, it needs to be acknowledged that we're both flawed human beings. And no matter how much I'm able to give you great wisdom and to teach you to develop your own powers. I still am a human being, as are you, and now you can operate in the same realm that I can. In most things, there's a clear sense of at least three conditions. There's the apprentice, there's the practicing person, and then there's the master. And I think that one of the problems is that there are a lack of masters, and so you have sort of like fellow practitioners acting like masters, and so it's very hard for that non-master to go, okay, now you're a master, because they don't quite feel it in themselves. When I'm working with people, I didn't really intend to become a magical teacher, but it just sort of, I wrote some stuff and it sort of developed. But I tend to try and graduate people as much as possible. I mean, I try and, you've reached the level that you're going to reach with me, move on. There's lots of people who I've done that with. And, I think that they thank me for it, and they do other things. There are tons of students of mine who have become students of other people, and who have become students, who have become teachers themselves in one way or another, and who've discovered their own unique thing and just moved toward that. I've had a number of people kind of move away from occultism and realize that what they really are is a musician who is interested in occult things, and so they realize that their personal daemon is driving them more towards music than magic, and they can incorporate the magical ideas in their music or in their art, or you know what I mean? It's not, so I mean, I think that's a wonderful thing when someone has that realization.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful.
They don't need to be a wizard. They're an artist in one way or another, and the magic is something that has sort of helped them to connect with their own genius.
There's many ways how to appreciate divinity, and music and art. It's just I see it was one of the forms, and I think it's beautiful if somebody's actually able to combine those two, so like art, like you're doing, or it's something else. It's all just expressions of divinity. But that kind of leads me to talking about students, and many people, obviously, when they have kids, like you have beautiful daughters, and they loads of
beautiful son.
And
two daughters and a son.
Yeah, you have also son. I only seen on their Facebook pictures of your daughters, so I think so. I might miss the son. So okay, so you have 3 kids. That's loads of kids. So loads of people actually, loads of people when they're parents, their kids become their students. Some people like no, never, no. So where you stand? Do you think it's a good idea to have your kids as your own students or introduce them in magic at all?
Yes. I mean, first of all, I think it's important, especially because I am a professional occultist. I do readings for people a lot. I don't do all that much spell work for people anymore. I did do that at a certain time, but and I teach people occultism, obviously. So I mean, it's a part of who I am. It's a part, it's how bread and butter ends up on our table, So it's important for me to share that with them. I'm not encouraging them to take over the family business or anything like that. That's up to them to discover. But I do feel it's important to introduce sort of magical principles to them at some point. One thing that I think is very important for me is that I don't like to participate in our cultural bullshit magic, which is to say Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and those sorts of things. I don't know how much you have those over in England. I know you have the Father Christmas a bit, but we have a ton of these false. It's a tooth fairy. These false things that are basically just opportunities for kids to become disillusioned with magical and mystical things. Yes, this is just a lie. I've been lying to you for years, and now here it is. How is that going to help the kid to become? And I feel like, and the funny thing is, it's largely within our Christian culture, it's encouraged, and it's like, see, you want people to believe in Jesus, this guy, this fantasy guy in the sky, but you're going to fool them about Santa Claus, and then eventually say, well, no, that's not real. I mean, how is that not going to eventually pollute their whole religious underpinnings as well, and make them go, well, how much of this is lies? I think that happens to thousands and thousands of children every day. So I try not to do that. But what I try and say is that, the way that we shape our thoughts and the way that we shape our actions has an influence on the universe, and there are symbols that we can utilize to sort of accelerate that process, and that's some of the stuff that Daddy makes and does. So that's kind of the way I try and explain it.
So would you
What's up? Go ahead.
So what do you think is the right age? Like, do you think like it's like when is roughly the right age to kind of fully introduce what's going on, and that there is this opportunity to kind of start it with for the kids?
Well, my daughter became really interested in Harry Potter, and my eldest, in the last couple of years, and she actually sought out on her own, because the internet, everyone can find out anything, right? She sought out on her own sort of a spell book that she liked, a grimoire, a modern grimoire of sort of simple spells that, with various kitchen things and stuff that she was drawn to, and so we recently got chickens, and there's 5 chickens and there's 5 of us, so everyone sort of had a chicken assigned to them, and my wife says to my daughter, what are you going to name your chicken? And she's like, I'm not sure yet, but I'm going to make her my familiar. I feel proud that she...
Obviously, it wasn't voodoo grimoire that she found out. Otherwise, the kitchen the chicken would end up differently.
European track.
Good.
She was like, no, I'm going to sacrifice it.
Wrong internet page.
No, but I mean, if she needs to do that, that's up to her too. Although not in the house. So I feel like it's an organic thing. The other thing that's challenging is that stage magic is making a big resurgence in our culture right now, and I love stage magic. I do a few magic tricks myself, and that confuses things a little bit for the kids too, because they're not sure what is an actual power and what is an actual trick, and they like to make up magic tricks. Like even my 4-year-old will bring something in tucked into his pants, and he'll furtively come up to me and he'll go, Daddy, I'm going to do a magic trick for you. He'll just produce it out of his pants,
Oh, cute.
So and that's not something that I encourage him. It's just literally things that he's seen on television or in books or I don't know. It's come to him through osmosis. So we've got kind of 2 different traditions of magic in our culture that are both important and present, and I think my family, my kids lean at this point a little bit more towards the entertainment side of things because they enjoy making me laugh and so forth. So, but I mean, I think they know that there's more than one kind of magic. My daughter, my eldest, her computer teacher did a magic trick for her in class, and then explained the magic trick to the kids and said to them, and this is why you mustn't ever believe that there's anything that magic is real in any way. And I actually called the principal and I said, listen, this is a religious issue. You need to not have that teacher saying that. There's a public school. You're not allowed to talk about Christianity, Buddhism, or Judaism. So let's not talk about whether magic is real or not. I'm sure I pissed her off, but hopefully she's not doing that anymore.
That was a nice thing to stay from the teacher. I'm offended now because that's what I do. That actually brings me to what you've been talking about earlier on this show, and that is because I guess we have to say it out loud. Let's say it as it is. Thanks to religious kind of, I would say, racism or oppression, the idea of a witch doctor or shaman or a whole name of profession disappeared. And it seems like you approach to the same thing, like how to call what I do. It's like, okay, so if somebody asks me, Astrid, what do you do? I'm a tarot card reader, and I do online courses, and I do alchemical tours, and I do healings, and I'm helping people with cleansing energy. I have to like give them this list, and I'm like, well, like there is no name for this profession. It used to be one of like, can I say I'm shaman? Well, they will think I'm just running around with a bone in my nose. Like, am I a witch doctor? It's like that's a kind of, but not entirely. So, do you think that in the future people will, I would say, resurrect this? Like, I would say, spiritual service person, for lack of better words. Do you think that this will become a profession again?
I live in a southern state of the United States, which is Florida. And
Florida's okay.
Florida, the further south in Florida you get, the more northern it gets, is what they say. Which is so, I mean, it's a mix where I live. But one thing that's very popular down here is spiritualist churches. And as I understand it, spiritualism is kind of different in in Great Britain as opposed to in the United States. Here in the United States, there's a big emphasis upon I don't know, it's called I can't remember the word, but it's basically effects mediumship, where you actually have things float around and stuff like that. But there still is this sort of gallery thing that I think is true of both traditions, where people get up on stage and kind of will go, oh, there's a person in the audience whose grandmother passed and she's got white hair and she says she loves you, and that kind of stuff. So that's a very popular thing, and that's kind of a role that replaces in some ways the witch doctor. It operates a lot of those places, and because then you can get a private reading with them later, and often they'll have some sort of a candle or something that they, of Saint Saint Germain, for instance, because he's one of the ascended masters that's popular in that crowd. And you'll go and you'll feel better about it. So I mean that sort of fulfills some of that role. And so medium or channeler, that's another one that has been utilized as a word quite a bit for similar tasks. Will the magical practitioner come back as a profession that is acknowledged in some way? I don't think so, because it hasn't ever, except for in really primitive. That's not a nice word. Except for in cultures that are really kind of growing and depend upon the cycle of nature, and someone who understands that stuff in a way that's very different from the way that we do. That character really doesn't have that clear of a role, and in fact, they're most often, for instance, the cunning man or the white witch in England was almost never tried under witchcraft laws. They were almost always tried under fraud laws. So it wasn't so much a religious problem as it was a cultural problem, that people were doing things that were not helpful. Because for instance, there are a lot of cases of a person going to see a white witch or a cunning man or a cunning woman, and they would do some sort of a divination to see who had stolen something, and that would result in an accusation in court of that person for having stolen it, and they're just dead wrong some of the time. As we all are who do divinatory arts. So that's sort of a dangerous thing. And so those people were from time immemorial in our culture, and the previous cultures that we've kind of grown out of, the magician as such is a little bit of a shady character. Not because they're necessarily doing something they don't believe in or doing anything wrong, but just because it doesn't fit with the way people do things most of the time,
Be like shadows.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when it works. I mean, it's funny when it doesn't work, and everybody, they're wrong, and everybody, like, if you do a spell and it actually makes a perceivable change in somebody's life, that's scary stuff, right? You know, I mean, you've got someone around who can make stuff happen.
Definitely. So that kind of slowly lead us into a grand finale of our show, and the last question that I wanted to ask the whole time. It's like people are like, oh, what is it going to be? What worse it can go? How worse it can go? And that is because I know you're actually also a hypnotist. Again, it's awesome how you're actually combining all of the different aspects of it together, like hypnotism and neurolinguistic programming and hermetics. And I'm really happy to see that, because I think that's the way to go. That's just my personal opinion. But I always wanted to ask, and I'm sure that quite a few thousand people listening, I'm definitely sure I'm not the only one who always wanted to ask to somebody who's doing a hypnosis, and it's how important is the tone of the voice. If you have really annoying voice like this, can you become a hypnotist without risking you actually will get slapped by the person who you're trying to hypnotize?
Well, okay, so let me ask you this, Astrid. What do you think about my voice? Is it a voice that makes you feel more comfortable, or a voice that makes you feel slightly alarmed?
Depends. Am I hearing it in a dark forest in the middle of the night? Yes or no?
Perhaps. The key to hypnosis is really, hypnosis is a word that is an envelope around an awful lot of different stuff, you know. So, you know, if we're talking about hypnotherapy, which is a very formal sort of, a person sits in a relaxing chair and another person speaks to them and kind of does affirmation therapy with them. Yes, having a relaxing voice is extremely important. But the real key to hypnosis and getting results with hypnosis is really, it's more in the person who is being hypnotized than it has anything to do with the person who's doing the hypnosis. The person who's being hypnotized needs to be in a state of rapport with the person who's the hypnotizer, meaning that they feel good about that person, they trust that person, they feel like that person is someone who is probably, if not smarter than them, at least more capable in this one area than they are, you know, and that they trust themselves to be on a journey with that person. If they don't feel that way, they're not going to go along with what's going on. And I'll tell you why in a second, but or at least my opinion on why. But because of that, someone who has a really squeaky, annoying voice, they're inherently not. They're going to find it difficult for people to get into rapport with people, because they're viewed in an annoying way. You know, you have a pleasant and seductive voice, and so people feel comfortable around you. And you're probably doing hypnosis all the time with people without necessarily even realizing that you're doing it. And maybe sometimes you kind of do. So when someone feels good with a person, they'll naturally enter into a state of rapport in which they're both sort of hypnotizing each other in one way or another. When someone feels weird about a person or alarmed by a person, they're very distant from that person. You know, if you know someone really well and they say, "Hey, can I hold on to your wallet for a minute?" You're gonna go, "Sure, you can hold on." But if some weirdo comes up to you and says, "Hey, let me hold your wallet for a minute," you're never gonna turn that over. It's just the same thing with the innards of your mind. You're just not going to, you know, if someone's alarming or weird in some way, you're always going to be keeping yourself kind of distant from checking it out. Because I mean, the key to hypnosis is that you want the person to basically be just responding to what you're saying as if it's happening outside of their control. So that, you know, if you're suggesting your arm is getting lighter and it's floating up in the air, they feel like, "Oh, I mean, this is a nice fellow. Maybe that is happening." You know, that's sort of the way that you want it to go. And as far as I'm concerned, the most accurate description of hypnosis that I've ever encountered is in the work of Ellman, in which he states that hypnosis is basically the suspension of the critical factor with a limiting of attention. So in other words, you get the person to stop questioning things and focus completely on what you're saying. And anytime you're in that situation, you're going to be in a hypnotic relationship with that person. And so you don't have to be laying down or anything like that.
Listen to my voice. You think that Spiritual Alchemy Show is a fun and educational radio show and you are really enjoying it. Now you're going to listen to it every week. I think I have natural talent.
I would definitely agree. But I mean, the other thing is, you're anytime that you get someone's attention to focus on what you're saying, you're limiting their attention to you, right? And anytime you get them to stop thinking about other stuff, you're getting them to suspend their critical factor. So really, just you going, "Hi, this is Astrid, and I want you to listen to what I'm talking about right now." If a person's going along with that, they're basically going into hypnosis immediately. You don't even have to say any of those suggestions. That just sort of keep leading them where you want them to go, and they'll be along for the ride.
Everybody's like, "Ah, I just was hypnotized." Yes, you're right.
Now, the funny thing about hypnosis is that's very frowned upon in both Crowley circles and Golden Dawn circles because of the fact that hypnotic mediumship was a huge thing in the late 19th century, and so these women would have these hypnotists kind of put them into these trances and get them to talk to spirits and so forth, and like the occultists at that time just saw it as like a really dangerous and there's no nothing to protect these women from whatever was coming in, and so it seemed incredibly irresponsible, and it seemed like these guys were having an imbalanced relationship with the women, who were usually sort of working class women who had been drawn into the situation by psychologists or proto-psychologists who were trying to study the way in which the hypnosis went, and there was also this sense that hypnosis might have something to do with some sort of animal magnetic fluid that traveled between the man and his subject, and of course that seems kind of ooky, that I would be like sending my astral essence into you and taking control. That's not a very friendly seeming thing. But now again, as we've grown as a culture, we've realized that none of that is actually true. It's all about communication, and in fact, it's been recognized by scientific people. It's been recognized as that way. Benjamin Franklin was the person who, was on the committee that when Mesmer was trying to prove that his magnetic therapy worked, was basically like, this just seems like you're just suggesting it and they're going along with it. That was the conclusion of that council, which is yes, that's absolutely what's going on with hypnosis. But the truth is, our minds and our consciousness is very easy to move around in different places if we just allow ourselves to go there. And so by finding a person who you do feel good with, who you can allow to help you to move into that kind of a space, it can be very transformative.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was so much absolutely amazing information you shared with us today, with our listeners who are completely hypnotized at this point, I'm sure. And I'm sure that they would definitely like to know where to find your books, and obviously you've done a set of audio recordings, so if you can tell our listeners where they can buy your books and your audio recordings and other things you are providing.
Yeah. My audio recordings can be found pretty easily at jasonaugustusnewcomb.com. That's just all one, no spaces or anything in there. I also on the site newhermetics.com, you can find some of it, but jasonaugustusnewcomb.com is kind of the newest version of it. My books can all be found on Amazon very easily. I think international Amazon. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to find me, Jason Augustus Newcomb, Newcomb, and you can find my stuff. I've got a lot. I've got over 250 recordings, and I've published about 20 books at this point, but I've written 6 or 7 myself that are fully my work. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there.
Amazing. So thank you so much, Jason. The whole hour flew like 2 minutes. So thank you so much for coming. And with you listeners, I will be looking forward to hear you next week. And if you would be interested, you can find the archive of this show on the Mixcloud, which is Spiritual Alchemy, or you can find it on www.spiritual-alchemy.uk, where is the whole archive, and on Facebook. You can follow us to see what will be the next show. If I'm correct, next show will be with Madeleine or Spencer about the dark side of Christianity. So if that's something you would be interested in, we'll be talking about possessed nuns. So it's going to be fun. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm going to hear you next week.